That's our crew patch, which parenthetically, with some inputs from us, was designed by my uncle, who's an artist in Annapolis, Maryland. You've all seen launches before. They're always spectacular to us that ride on them, and I know from watching some of them, they're spectacular from the ground also. You're aware that we had a scrub the first day due to upper-level wind shears, and even though it was a beautiful blue sky on that day, it was the right thing to do to cancel for the day, and we went back to the quarters and relaxed and got up the next morning, and 7:15 Eastern Time, here we go. This is the second flight of Discovery. Always a beautiful sight as it goes through its roll program to point us downrange, and certainly a thrilling feeling. I'd like to turn it over to Dave Walker and let him give you some of his impressions of his first flight.
Well, I was excited, obviously. They don't measure our heart rates anymore going uphill, but I'm sure mine was really thumping. On the other hand, the vehicle flew absolutely smoothly and exactly as we had been prepared to expect it to, and the whole thing felt very controlled, although there's a tremendous rush involved with this particular experience, as you might imagine.
Anna Fisher was our flight engineer, sitting in between Dave and myself, and being prepared to prompt us, make sure we did all the right things, which she did beautifully. Joe?
8.5 minutes later, we were in orbit. I asked if I could open my eyes yet, and this is what one sees when you do open your eyes. It's a beautiful, beautiful sight. The crew members, Rick, looking somewhat relieved that the launch went so well. Trusty pilot Dave Walker, unidentified mission specialist Anna Fisher, and straight from the college campus, Dale Gardner. That is just a quick scenes of life in orbit. Our first task, of course, was to deploy Telesat. It was a nighttime deploy, and so this is a TV picture, nighttime TV picture of the deploy. It looks more or less like in the day. You just can't see it too well. Went smoothly, and really not much else to say about that. We had another deploy the next day, and Dale, why don't you describe that?
Flight day 3, we deployed the SYNCOM satellite called LESAT sometimes, similar to what you saw this last spring on 41D. It's a large satellite, as you can see, comes out in that frisbee fashion that we've talked about before. It's about 14 feet in diameter and weighs 13,000 pounds. And it really looked large to us as it came out of the payload bay. Very slowly also, as you can see, only just a little over a foot per second departure from the bay. The one nice aspect about the SYNCOM deploy is that we punch it out down towards the Earth in the attitude we're at. So as it leaves the bay, and you can see here we have a beautiful view of the Earth down below as the satellite departs.
This is a few scenes of some of the things we do on orbit that don't generally get shown. This is a fairly mundane operation, but very important one, called the on-orbit flight control system checkout, which Rick and I did. Gives you a chance to see what the flight deck looks like a little bit on orbit, rather like a large airliner. The CRTs there can be seen blinking, and from there we're going to show you a little bit of the mid-deck. This actually was taken by Dr. Allen with Captain Hauck pushing him along as he held our movie camera in front of him, going down into the mid-deck, and you can see the portable foot restraints that we attached to enable us to stay put, our treadmill that we use for exercise, and some of the lockers. That particular one that's open contains in-flight maintenance equipment, which Eagle Electronics used. And over on the starboard bulkhead of the mid-deck, you can see the sleep accommodations, which I think I'll let Dr. Fisher discuss a little bit about the rest of the mid-deck area.
Well, in this particular sequence, we're showing how we prepare a meal. And we divided these tasks up among all the crew members. Dale usually wound up doing breakfast because nobody was quick enough for him. Making meals is a fairly easy task on orbit. All you had to do is essentially like, it's very good, essentially like backpacking. You essentially add water to the food, and it was very good. I'll let Rick describe what we're doing here.
Well, at the risk of endorsing a product, that's an interesting physical demonstration on orbit of the fact that things really are weightless.
That's how the crew was rewarded when we did something properly.
Right.
Rick would release another handful.
Since Anna did more things right than anybody, she got most of them.
You can see it is a rather dreamlike world, both awake and sleeping. This is Dave in the upper bunk after the first EVA.
Saying, oh no, we have to do another one?
Yeah.
Part of our time on orbit is spent doing filter cleaning. What you see Dale and Dave doing here is removing some panels so that we can get to access to the filters. Again, it's much like life here on Earth. Things you got to do. You got to eat. You got to be able to clean all of your equipment. This actually took several hours. We were doing this on the day in between EVAs. Then once those panels were removed, we were able to get access to the filters, and here I am cleaning again. I thought I was going to escape that for a couple of weeks, but for a week or so. But and this is, as I said, a very important part of our work on orbit, to keep things clean. You can see it wasn't just me who did that. Up on the flight deck, Dave's "a clean ship is a happy ship."
Dave on orbit described Dr. Allen as large in personality but diminutive in stature. Whenever his personality got a little bit too large, we would stuff him away in a locker for a few hours, and then when a task needed to be done, it was my job to go down and get him out. This was a somewhat unpleasant task for me, but Joe seemed to like the freedom at times. And
the hard part was putting him back in there again later once we got him.
Flight days 5 and 7, of course, are the EVA days. This is the airlock. You can see the two suits up by my left and right shoulder, the main suits. Down by my right leg is a spare suit that we carried. When it was determined the two prime suits were going to operate properly, we took that spare suit out and didn't use it. Up on the flight deck, the folks were preparing for the rendezvous.
Yeah, the day started fairly early for Rick and myself. About an hour and a half into our post-sleep activities, we got involved in the sequence of burns that were going to require to bring us in proximity with the satellite. As you can see here, we were always checking and double-checking each other, making sure that every input we put in was correct. This is a sequence through the COAS, our device that Rick used to look overhead to sight on the satellite. And this, as you can see the satellite at a distance of about, I guess we were 50 miles here. It looked like a star as you looked at. And I'll hand it over to Rick now to talk about the final parts of the rendezvous.
Here we are probably about 300 feet, now maybe down to about 50 feet away from the satellite. We're firing lots of jets on board to slow us down, to rendezvous with the satellite, putting it just about 35 feet from satellite to overhead the bay. After the next sunrise, here's Joe getting ready to go out with the MMU.
We have a sequence of footage now that are drawn from both the EVAs, interspersed. We won't distinguish between the two, but try to give you a flavor for what it was like. Rick says right at sunrise we went out. Dale's actually flying out here with Rick recording most of this on all sorts of film. About this time I thought that he should think twice about it, but Dale, go ahead and describe.
Joe had done this on flight day 5 and had proven that the MMU and the Stinger concept for capturing the satellite worked worked perfectly. And I essentially had just a lot of fun on flight day 7, knowing that it all worked. It took a big load off my mind. I flew out a little bit differently than Joe had. You might remember Joe commenting that the sun had bothered him. It was in his eyes during the last phase. And you'll see here in a minute that when the sun finally does come up, I was fortunate enough to use the orbiter's nose to shadow the sun. So my approach to the satellite, and you can see that the shadow of the nose of the orbiter now is on the satellite and on me. And so my docking was a little bit easier with that information that Joe had given me from the earlier EVA. MMUs performed flawlessly, as you heard us talk about from space, and this method of capturing the satellite certainly worked well. And
you can see the arm in the lower right corner of the picture, which was a position that Anna had put it in to assist in our station keeping task.
Notice that the people who brought that satellite to us left it in absolutely perfect position with regard to its rotation and lack of nutation, which we appreciated.
We can't emphasize that enough. The satellite originally was rotating 50 revolutions per minute, but was slowed down by ground controllers very painstakingly over many, many weeks' time, positioned and slowed down. And in the slowing, they left it still turning at a very, very regular rate. So it made our job absolutely easy as pie. Once docked, the procedure then was to use the MMU to stop the rotation, which was equally easy. You can see it's now quite stable, and the MMU pilot could then maneuver the satellite, turn it wherever we wanted it in such a way that Anna could grab the grapple fixture.
Yeah, this is a sequence from the first rendezvous, and it worked just like it did in the simulator, getting Joe commands to maneuver it such that I could see the end effector, the grapple target, and it went very well, very smoothly.
From an MMU crewman's point of view, it's interesting to see the large arm coming up right over your shoulder to suddenly grasp the satellite. This a shot of Dale working on the satellite, the top end. In fact, he just removed the Omni antenna with some very fancy space equipment known as pruning shears.
That was about the last nominal portion of that first EVA. Here we see where we first learned as a group that the common bracket clamp, which Dale has in his hand, was not going to fit at the appropriate place, which was on the common bracket on the satellite.
Let's parenthetically emphasize that that was a very well-designed piece of equipment by folks here at JSC, and unfortunately we just didn't have the information available to us that would tell us that it would not fit.
And it's appropriate to add here that we had enough pre-planned contingency operations available to us that again had been developed not by us but by the whole team to carry us through, and we went to Plan B, as we called it at that point.
David was the keeper of Plan B. Dale and I had not the vaguest notion what it was, but we were confident that in his plans Dave could direct us. And the first step, he directed me to come off the Stinger, fly the MMU back to its storage place in the orbiter, and then prepare to hold the satellite at the antenna end while Dale worked on it. You get an idea of the flying qualities of the MMU here. It is as smooth as glass to fly. You just can put it wherever you want it, turn it as you want it. Interesting, you see here the reflection in my helmet of the bulkhead. You see the two windows through which the three other crewmen were working, or behind which they were working, and in fact here at the last you can even see the movie camera that Rick has pointed out the window taking this movie. The bright spot on the bulkhead is the light that we use to illuminate the work volume out in the payload bay during the nighttime passes.
About this point we said, well, you can see Dale working in the back, by the way. That's a good shot of him showing the teamwork involved getting that foot restraint ready with some tool boards and so on so that we can press on with the next task.
Meanwhile, Joe is getting ready to doff the manned maneuvering unit and go to put himself in the portable foot restraint, which is forward of where you can see there, and here he is Now, and he's supposed to talk here, but I'm going to say first that this was not easy for Joseph. He worked very hard for a long time here, and both of the EVA crewmen worked very hard during this particular phase of it. We were all very, very concerned that this part went well, and fortunately it did.
You can see, though, that the satellite, although it weighs about 1,200 pounds, is only massive in orbit. It's not heavy, and you can move it to wherever it needs to be moved. The most difficult part was you could not tell really where you were putting it. And so we relied totally on directions from Dave most of the time, and occasionally, as to where it should be moved. And they would just say, over your head or more to the right. And we tried to be very careful that we were not moving it to a place where it would hit the side of the orbiter or a piece of equipment on the orbiter, lest it be damaged.
Joe was bringing the satellite back down into position for me to put the shower cap, as we called it, was a cover that we put over the nozzle, such that small particles that were inside the rocket engine would not contaminate the payload bay. Here I've attached the adapter, that interface that will allow the satellite to go into the payload bay, onto the satellite, and I'm torquing down one of the 9 hard dock latches that we had to use in order to form a tight fit between the satellite and that adapter. Now Joe has handed the satellite and adapter combination to me. I'm holding it, and he's going to go around to get in position for us to berth the combination into the bay.
And it worked. It worked. There shows a photo of the 2 satellites and a little advertisement there.
We had to, several times after flight day 7, when both were in the bay, go up to the windows and just look back there to make sure both satellites were there. There were times when none of the 5 of us really believed that we'd actually pulled it off, and it was certainly comforting to look back there and see both those satellites staring at us.
Well, in the words of an old philosopher, it ain't over till it's over, and I guarantee it's not over yet, because we still have to land. And here we are at runway 15 at the Kennedy Space Center. Good calls from the folks in the air and on the ground. John Young, weather pilot. The weather was good to the north, so we landed with a slight tailwind. And coming down here at 300 feet, Dave deployed the landing gear. And the orbiter flew beautifully, just as we trained for it to fly in the shuttle training airplane. Look at the vortexes being shed off the wingtips there, and when we touch down, you can see how the smoke from the tires gets caught up in those vortices. Real pretty picture. Touchdown was at about 190 knots, understand about 2,700 feet down the runway, and we used a total of 93 to 9,500 feet of runway during the rollout. It was very nice for us to come back to the Kennedy Space Center. All of our families were there. Of course, it's nice for the program that we got back there also to reduce turnaround time. There was our flight engineer sitting in between Dave and myself and being prepared to prompt us, make sure we did all the right things, which she did beautifully. Joe?
8.5 minutes later, we were in orbit. I asked if I could open my eyes yet, and this is what one sees when you do open your eyes. It's a beautiful, beautiful sight. The crew members, Rick, looking somewhat relieved that the launch went so well. Trusty pilot Dave Walker, unidentified mission specialist Anna Fisher, and straight from the college campus, Dale Gardner. That is just a quick scenes of life in orbit. Our first task, of course, was to deploy Telesat.
That's our crew patch, which parenthetically, with some inputs from us, was designed by my uncle, who's an artist in Annapolis, Maryland. You've all seen launches before. They're always spectacular to us that ride on them, and I know from watching some of them, they're spectacular from the ground also. You're aware that we had a scrub the first day due to upper level wind shears, and even though it was a beautiful blue sea, some of his impressions of his first flight.
Well, I was excited, obviously. They don't measure our heart rates anymore going uphill, but I'm sure mine was really thumping. On the other hand, the vehicle flew absolutely smoothly and exactly as we'd been prepared to expect it to, and the whole thing felt very controlled, although there's a tremendous rush involved with this particular experience, as you might imagine.
And a Fisher Sky on that day, it was the right thing to do to cancel for the day, and we went back to the quarters and relaxed and got up the next morning, and 7:15 Eastern Time, here we go. This is the second flight of Discovery. Always a beautiful sight as it goes through its roll program to point us downrange, and certainly a thrilling feeling. I'd like to turn it over to Dave Walker and let him